In his writing about the 79 AD eruption of Mount Vesuvius, this is what Cassius Dio had to say. This was what befell. Numbers of huge men, quite surpassing any human stature, such creatures, in fact, as the giants are pictured to have been, appeared now on the mountain, now in the surrounding country, and again in the cities, wandering over the earth day and night, and also flitting through the air. Now I'm just interjecting here. So what we're reading from Cassius Dio in his writing about the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD is that there were giants, and some of them were actually flying through the sky, and they were compared to the giants, the antediluvian giants. After this, fearful droughts and sudden and violent earthquakes occurred, so that the whole plain round about seethed, and the summits leaped into the air. There were frequent rumblings, some of them subterranean, that resembled thunder, and some on the surface that sounded like bellowings. The sea also joined in the roar, and the sky re-echoed it. Then suddenly a portentous crash was heard, as if the mountains were tumbling in ruins, and first huge stones were hurled aloft, rising as high as the very summits. Then came a great quantity of fire and endless smoke, so that the whole atmosphere was obscured, and the sun was entirely hidden, as if eclipsed. Thus day was turned into night, and light into darkness. Some thought that the giants were rising again in revolt, for at this time also many of their forms could be discerned in the smoke, and moreover a sound as of trumpets was heard, while others believed that the whole universe was being resolved into chaos or fire. Therefore they fled, some from the houses into the streets, others from outside into the houses, now from the sea to the land, and now from the land to the sea, for in their excitement they regarded any place where they were not as safer than where they were. While this was going on, an inconceivable quantity of ashes was blown out, which covered both sea and land, and filled all the air. It wrought much injury of various kinds, as chance befell, to men and farms and cattle, and in particular it destroyed all fish and birds. Furthermore, it buried two entire cities, Herculaneum and Pompeii, the latter place while its populace was seated in the theater. Indeed, the amount of dust taken altogether was so great that some of it reached Africa and Syria and Egypt, and it also reached Rome, filling the air overhead and darkening the sun. There too, no little fear was occasioned, that lasted for several days, since the people did not know and could not imagine what had happened, but, like those close at hand, believed that the whole world was being turned upside down, that the sun was disappearing into the earth, and that the earth was being lifted to the sky. These ashes now did the Romans no great harm at the time, though later they brought a terrible pestilence upon them. I just want to pause right here, and I want to point out that so many people, when we look at a historical fulfillment of the book of Revelation, people want to say that many of these destructive events, there's nothing like that. We don't see anything like that in history. That's because you're not reading and you're not looking these things up. This was an enormous event. People thought that the sun was disappearing into the earth. There were earthquakes. The sky was darkened. The sun was eclipsed. So if you want to take a look at what actually happened in those days, I encourage you to go ahead and do that, because you can find many, many, many examples of events that closely do fit what is written about in the book of Revelation. I'm going to continue reading on now. However, a second conflagration above ground in the following year spread over very large sections of Rome, while Titus was absent in Campania, attending to the catastrophe that had befallen that region. It consumed the temple of Serapis, the temple of Isis, the Sciepta, the temple of Neptune, the baths of Agrippa, the Pantheon, the Diribatorium, the theater of Balbus, the stage building of Pompey's theater, the Octavian buildings together with their books, and the temple of Jupiter Capitolinus with their surrounding temples. Hence, the disaster seemed to be not of human, but of divine origin. For anyone can estimate from the list of buildings that I have given how many others must have been destroyed. So this next paragraph is commentary from John Paul Miles, and he says, many people who worshipped false gods believed the gods were destroyed at this time. Pliny the Younger, who survived the eruption of Mount Vesuvius, wrote, you could hear the wailing of women, the screams of little children, and the shouts of men. Some were trying to find their parents, others their children, others their wives, by calling for them and recognizing them by their voices alone. Some were commiserating their own lot, others that of their relatives, while some again prayed for death in sheer terror of dying. Many were lifting up their hands to the gods, but more were declaring that now there were no more gods, and that this night would last forever and the end of all the world. So let's just take a moment to imagine what it was like to have been there in that time. In the midst of Mount Vesuvius erupting, we have fire raining down from the sky. We have earthquakes, some that are subterranean. We have smoke reaching to Africa, Egypt, and Rome. The sun was eclipsed. And I'm just going to reiterate something that Cassius Dio had said that I had read earlier, because he says it much better than I can. There too, no little fear was occasioned, that lasted for several days, since the people did not know and could not imagine what had happened, but like those close at hand believed that the whole world was being turned upside down, that the sun was disappearing into the earth, and that the earth was being lifted to the sky. So that might give some of you a clue as to the possible correlation between the eruption of Mount Vesuvius and Magog. Now I'm just going to go back to the chapter in which he also correlates Mount Vesuvius to the lake of fire. And again, this is just a foretaste. I'll be talking about this more in a future video. But what John Paul Miles says, so this is not Cassius Dio, now this is John Paul Miles, he says, again, this is the book On Time. The sense in which Rome was thrown alive into the lake of fire occurred in 79 AD. And one thing that I do have to point out is that Rome was, in John Paul Miles's way of thinking, the sea beast was Rome. Okay, so the sense in which Rome was thrown alive into the lake of fire occurred in 79 AD, when Mount Vesuvius erupted and instantly destroyed two entire coastline cities of Rome while the populace was inside. In fact, the immediate death caused by the lava and ash left human statues that preserve their form and even clothing to this day. Interestingly, Satan was also thrown into the lake of fire a year after the volcano eruption, when a fire destroyed most or all of the satanic temples in Rome. So if you recall, when I was just reading all of the temples that were destroyed a year after the volcanic eruption, the baths of Agrippa, the Pantheon, the theater of Balbus, the temple of Isis, yes, they were satanic. Anything not of God is of Satan. They were destroyed in this fire that came the year after Mount Vesuvius. And one thing that I actually just want to add here, which is kind of off topic, but I have to say it, is that, so even John Paul Miles mentioned how the eruption left human statues. And a lot of times what you will get is they will say that they actually had to dig and that they poured concrete or whatever and plaster in to make these statues, and that they just found these cavities and that's how they made them. And no, apparently he heard the same thing that I did. These were the actual human statues left from the hardened volcanic ash. I could be speaking for him, but that's at least what it sounds like to me. That's one thing that I really like about the book On Time. That's where a lot of this is from, is that the author, he includes so many footnotes. So if you wanted to take a look for yourself at what Cassius Dio wrote, he will actually have in the footnotes exactly where you can find the